It is my great pleasure to introduce Rachel Snack, an alum of our Master of Science in Textile Design program. Rachel Snack, the owner, founder of Weaver House, is going to share her presentation, Creatively Pivoting in 2020. Rachel, I'm very happy to turn it over to you.
Hey, Marcia, thanks for having me. Can you hear
You're,
me okay?
we can hear you fine.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm gonna start sharing my screen. All right. So welcome everyone. Thank you, Marcia and Design Philly and Jefferson University for having me. I'm really happy to be talking to you guys today. And I am going to be presenting on creatively pivoting. So that's kind of a broad subject matter. I know I will pinpoint exactly what I'm going to talk about later. But first, I just wanted to do a little introduction, introduce myself and my business, Weaver House. So I'm going to start by sharing some of my woven work so you guys can see what I actually make. I am a weaver, an educator, and a textile conservator. And I received my Bachelor of Fine Art in Fiber and Material Studies from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And then later, I received my Master of Science in Textile Design from Philadelphia University, which is now Jefferson. So Marcia was my great mentor and teacher, which I'm very thankful for. And then in 2014, I founded Weaver House, which is a textile studio dedicated to preserving craft tradition through handmaking and weaving education. And my most recent large-scale project is the digital archive and imprint revival of the weaving periodical Warp and Weft, which I'm going to touch upon later and show you slides later. I have conserved objects for exhibitions at the National Constitution Center, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Fabric Workshop and Museum, the New York Public Library, and the Museum of Arts and Design. And I am also an adjunct professor at Drexel University. So those were just some slides of my actual weaving, and a lot of them were actually made during the pandemic, so in the last 6 months. So then Weaver House, I put our little blurb, our mission statement on here, and I'm just going to read parts of it right now. So Weaver House is a yarn shop, a textile studio, and a weaving school located in Philly. We create heirloom textiles and homage to craft tradition and the dialect between maker and loom. Our woven practice is grounded in the idea of growing a tangible language to regain tactility and a handmaking consciousness within the home and in relation to the body. We teach mindfulness and meditation throughout all of our workshops and believe that weaving can be therapeutic and healing. The Weaver House Studio was founded to inspire communal collaboration, weaving education, and creative gathering. Our shop is carefully curated with specialty fibers sourced from around the world, hand-selected textiles and goods, and weaving equipment. So we are located in the Bach Building in South Philly. If you've ever been to Bach Bar, that's kind of the Bach Building is known for our rooftop bar, but the building also hosts or has over 175 businesses and just renovated 2 new floors. So I think that number has probably grown within the last couple of months. We are currently closed to the public, but we are offering curbside pickup to local Philadelphians who need a little bit of a yarn boost. So our shop is a retail area, which you can see here. And then we also have the weaving school component, which is a separate space that's connected to the retail store. And so this, you can see, this is our weaving school. The left photo is photos of or rigid heddle loom set up for a rigid heddle weaving workshop. And you can see in the background all of the floor looms that are folded up. So we teach all levels of weaving workshops: frame loom weaving, rigid heddle weaving, floor loom weaving. And you can see our student yarn wall on the right photo. But since the pandemic has happened and we've been closed to the public, this is also the studio that I work out of. So I have kind of taken over the studio, dressed all of the looms for my commission work, and really just made it my space, which has been pretty neat. And then this is a photo of actually when we had people in the space. On the left-hand side is a meditative weaving workshop happening, and on the right-hand side is our two students that actually went through our intro to floor loom weaving workshop, and those are the textiles they wove in the 2-day intensive workshop. So in that workshop, you learn how to everything about, drafting a design, dressing the loom, and then actually weaving. Okay, so that was just a little intro so you know where I am coming from as I talk you through the next slides. My background not only in textile design and conservation, but also in teaching and education. And I kind of pulled from all of those different areas that I'm very passionate about to talk about how we can creatively pivot during this time. And so, as I started to think about the ways that I've creatively pivoted and what strategies I could present on, I kind of came down to 4 different sections. Thinking about how to stay inspired and committed to the practice of making at home, how to maintain productivity with limited resources, how to reach a new audience outside of social networking and in person events, and how to find purpose in creating during a moment of immense stress and social upheaval. And I realized that it all really came down to implementing small systems. And within those small systems, celebrating the processes, not just the outcome, and practicing gratitude for what is achievable and not what is lost. And I think it's really important for us to remember that currently society is evolving during this time. Um, and not only during this time, but also due to the pandemic. And it's hard to see evolution as it's actually happening. The creative landscape is shifting as this evolution takes place. And if we're not careful, we'll miss the lessons that can be learned during this period of growth. So I really encourage everyone to reflect upon what you've lived through and what you're currently living through and how your processes have changed due to this like forced evolution that we're all experiencing. Okay, so how to stay inspired and committed to a practice of making at home. First tool is to really designate a creative space. So, working from home, I mean, a lot of people have been forced to work at home, have either given up their studio spaces or their desk job, and have really taken everything home. And I think it has completely shifted the way that we view creativity. And so, designating a creative space within your home is really important because studies have literally shown that you can train your brain um, to associate space with different modes of being. So it really makes sense, right? How like um, a lot of studies have told people like not to bring their cell phones into the bedroom or to watch TV in bed because your body associates being in your bedroom with going to sleep and relaxing. And so if you bring in a screen or you have technology that's waking up your brain, it's sending your body mixed signals, and that's why sometimes it's hard to fall asleep after you've been looking at your screen for hours. The same way, you can really train your brain and your body to believe that certain spaces are meant for creative purposes, or even productive purposes. This doesn't just apply to being creative. So actually designating a space for making, even if it's one table in your living room. I mean, if it can be a separate room, that's even better, but a lot of people don't have space for that. But just when you're in that space, it's only for creating. So you're not also doing admin, you're not also like looking at emails, you're just making, you're putting down your phone and you're making in that space. And if you do that on a routine, your brain will naturally help you stay creative and productive when you're in that space. Another thing that I found that has really helped me is setting smaller goals, either daily or weekly goals or daily or weekly practice. So I've really tried to let myself let go of the big picture because we truly don't know what the big picture means anymore. I mean, and if we focus on that, things, goals, and different ways that we used to tackle projects and we used to work can just feel like really intimidating and overwhelming. And so, really asking yourself, what can I do in this moment and in my immediate future to make something or to be productive? And so, I know a few artists who have literally, done a weaving a week, like a weekly weaving, where I know one artist was using just materials like waste that they had produced that week. So, paper, or odds and ends, plastic Ziploc bags, and they were weaving pieces with just those materials and having the focus be that it's not really about what you're making and it's not about what it looks like at the end, but it's setting aside that time every week to make one weaving. And it's a very small, achievable goal. And when you do that for a whole month, and then later you look back and you can see, all these different things that you've made, and it doesn't feel so intense, or it doesn't feel like you are working towards this bigger, larger goal that you're not sure, well, how long am I going to hold this practice? Like, it's not really about focusing on that. It's really focusing on what I can do today that can be meaningful and help me feel accomplished today. The other thing is shifting expectations, and accepted level of productivity, because things are not what they were. What worked in the past is most likely not going to work for you right now at home. So being able to come into work and get your coffee and sit down and have an 8-hour productive day might not look the same when you're working from home. You might need to take more breaks. You might need to go on walks. Also, your stress level just from like experiencing everything that goes along with living through a pandemic is also, you have to completely shift the expectations that you can put on yourself, because some days are just going to be harder than others. And you really have to have grace with yourself to say, like, not everything is moving at the same pace that it was before. And so I need to have understanding not only with myself, but with others. And one of the big things I know for my business and for Weaver House in terms of shifting expectations that, I've really had to practice patience with is a lot of my suppliers, a lot of my yarn manufacturers shut down due to COVID. They stopped producing yarn. And even if they're up and running now, they're really behind schedule. So many of my best selling yarns were out of stock for a really long time. And I was trying to figure out workarounds to this, maybe buying back stock from other shops. And in the beginning, I was really panicking. And then finally, I just realized, like, everyone has to take a pause. And if these yarns aren't in stock immediately or at the, schedule that they normally are, that's okay. And I can't have the expectation that my manufacturer is going to, you know, suddenly produce these like magic and I'll have them, and B, that I am letting down my customers. Like, I had it in my head that I was really letting them down because they didn't have these yarns in stock. And I just realized, what, I can just start suggesting an alternative yarn. And no one was upset and everyone was happy to make that adjustment. And I had to shift my expectations for what I could provide for my customers during that time. And the last thing I want to talk about is setting boundaries. I think this is right. This is such an important thing to do for all of our mental health and well being in and outside of work. But I think it's really resonated with me during this time, just telling myself that it's okay to say no. This kind of ties into creating a weekly practice, at least for me, running Weaver House. But I have really started to set boundaries weekly with what I'm actually doing each week and each day. So, for instance, I have decided that every Tuesday is my like calls, Zooms, phone day. I don't know if you all have experienced this as well, but I've just felt like since, the pandemic has happened, my volume of calls and the conference calls, the Zoom calls, even just the client calls that I've been fielding has just magnified. And part of that I think is because, we're not being able to meet in person, but I also think that people are just have shifted the way that they're working and want to be connecting through the phone a lot more. And I was just feeling like I was on the phone every day and it was interrupting my weaving schedule and it was exhausting. And so I decided that I'm only going to schedule phone calls on Tuesday. And once that day fills up, if I have no more space, I will just schedule, the rest of my calls for the following week. And obviously, I know I'm running a small business and I can set these boundaries for myself that, people who answer to a boss might not be able to do the same thing and say, sorry, I can't take your call today. I totally understand that. But for me, in terms of finding balance, that was really important to set that boundary. And then the same thing, I ship out every Wednesday, which has really helped me, to focus on only shipping one day a week has really freed up the rest of my week to do other things that are equally as important. And then Friday is my water the plants and admin day. So it's often the day that I wear comfy clothes, buckle down, answer the hundreds of emails that came in that week, and really focus on admin. And so, not only setting boundaries for yourself and knowing what you can handle within your schedule, but also knowing that it's okay to say no and that everyone is experiencing this. And there is a lot of empathy and grace happening because we are all trying to figure out how to make it work during this time. And so, at any time I've ever said to one of my clients, I'm really sorry, I'm only scheduling things on Tuesday. Can we talk next week? It's always been like an absolutely yes, I totally understand. And I'm sure that you guys have also experienced that when someone's, at home and has like a crying toddler in the background and they're like, I'm so sorry. And you're like, no, this is what it means to work from home. And this is what it means for our lives to just be integrated in a different way. Um, and it's something that we just have to respect from each other, and setting those boundaries is a good way to do that. So moving on to the second thing I was really thinking about, which is how to maintain productivity with limited resources. And I know that this is also something that a lot of students feel when they leave school, because you were in school for 4 years, you had anything at your fingertips, whether you are a weaver and had looms and yarn and every computer program you needed. You had a library, you had in, Jefferson's case, amazing jacquard looms. And now all of a sudden you leave school and you have a frame loom and one cone of yarn. How do you produce the same textiles that you were making in graduate school? And I also think that everyone is really feeling that right now, like how to maintain productivity with limited resources, because we are unable to just go to a library and do research, or we're unable to share supplies or tools or studio spaces. We're unable to even be in our offices where we might even have little things like a printer, like, oh, all of a sudden I need a printer at home. And so how we can think about, still being productive, and what can you do as a single person or artist or designer without tools, maybe without money and without resources and a team to back you. So I think the huge silver lining to this is it's really forcing everyone to innovate within their practices and find new tools, strategies, and processes. And I think when you have a lot at your disposal, you take for granted what is right in front of you. And even sometimes you stop innovating because something is working and it's easy to implement, and you can just regurgitate the same content over and over and over again. And soon you realize that your product design or your practice or what you're making has kind of gone stale. And so I always think back, as I was really considering, also, like, this is a Jefferson Textile Symposium, Marcia used to do this project in graduate school where she used to set limits on what materials you could make, and she might still do this in the programming. And so you're really forced to make within a certain, limit of materials. So it might be a color, it might be the actual fiber type, it might be scale or loom type, and then you have to create a whole collection with those limitations. And it's always fascinating to see what people make when they have to innovate, when they have to, change their normal modes of making. They can't just stay in their comfort zone, and they have to push themselves into creating a different either body of work or type of work, or thinking about a whole new product line. If I can't get this yarn from the mill anymore to make the textiles I normally make, like what can I use instead? And so it's really like forcing us to go back to paper and pencil, like going back to the purest form. If you normally work on digital looms, it might be forcing you to go back to hand weaving. And so it's a really unique opportunity to appreciate, those circumstances that they are forcing you to reevaluate your systems and the way that you're approaching design. The second thing is, I think that one way you can maintain productivity with limited resources is by collaborating with people who might have the resources you need. And this is like such a phenomenal time to do that because, right, like you can collaborate with someone and it does not have to be in person. And it's a really exciting, unique way to support someone else. And then to also essentially like double your creative capital, right? Because you're asking others to help you achieve what your goals are and what you're hoping to make. So one of the most like unique factors of this time is that everyone is affected by this pandemic in one way or another. There is a common bond that we all share. And now more than ever, this is an opportunity for us to connect in new and meaningful ways. Like we're all facing the same issues, maybe at different scales, but it's still like I can't think of anything in my lifetime or anyone who's probably in this Zoom where something has been so uniquely universal. And so I found that any designers or artists or businesses that I've reached out to say, like, hey, I've always admired your work. I've never really had the space or the time to consider what a collaboration between us would look like, but I'm doing it now. And I'm hoping that we could work together and figure out something with like the limited resources we each have. How could we create something really cool and unique between us? And out of everyone I've reached out to during this time, like everyone is always, responds to me with a resounding like, yes, I love this idea. Like I definitely want to try something like this. And so it's a really fun time to like consider collaborating with people that you've always wanted to, or maybe consider collaborating with new people in your network. And then I think another important thing to remember when thinking about maintaining productivity is prioritizing balance. So balance is such this unique, um, fleeting, can be a buzzword sometimes, idea in your life where everyone ideally wants a balanced life, balance between personal and work, fulfillment, and being successful and all of those things, like trying to find that perfect balance. And the reality is like it's pretty unobtainable, but we can work as best as we can to not only set boundaries like I talked about before to maintain balance, but to also just remember that like everything feels so intense right now because not only are we all our landscapes have shifted, right? So we might be working from home, or we might be so everything feels so intense right now, and it's really easy to get burnt out. So now, we're our landscapes have shifted. We are in a different creative space making, maybe that's at home, maybe that's just at a studio space that used to have other people there, and now you're there alone, and your creative um, resources have completely changed because of that. But it's easy to get burnt out, and I just encourage everyone to have grace with themselves, that's saying like, I need to prioritize myself maybe right now over what I'm doing at work or what I'm doing creatively, and I need to pause and find balance again. That's like a way to actually maintain productivity, because you are actually allowing yourself to recognize what you truly need, and you will be more productive in the long run instead of trying to push through and actually kind of like force things to happen. So it's really important to prioritize not only yourself but finding balance. So the next thing I'm going to touch upon is how to reach a new audience outside of social networking and in-person events. Right. So, like normally to broaden our networks, we can go to different events. I mean, something like this textile symposium might have been in person, which would have been awesome. We all could have met in real life. And now all of a sudden, we are all kind of like not stuck, not only 6 feet apart, but also doing our own thing in our own spaces, pretty isolated. Even if you're working with a team, I've been hearing this from even like different teams working together where they just feel like there is not a social component of their job anymore because everything is through Zoom or online or through chat and email. So I found that the most important thing to reaching a new audience outside of these like normal um, networking events or even social experience that happen naturally when we can all spend time together um, is the greatest tool is effective communication in achieving this. So use technology wisely, be clear with yourself, and also present clearly so that way you can find the best ways that you enjoy communicating and be more of an effective communicator. So, what this really means is if you are trying to reach a new audience or you're even trying to stay connected with those that you already have a relationship with, figure out what way you best like communicating, whether that is on the phone or that is email or that is Zoom or maybe it's snail mail, like who knows, whatever the best way that you find communicating, and then really hone in on like out of that communication, okay, email, like I want to check in with this person every week on this day and kind of set that as a goal for yourself. And that way you can effectively communicate, you can stay connected, you can essentially broaden your social network by doing that. And that's also like the same thing about reaching out to new people, that the same thing applies, because I think we get so caught up in what we need to do on a daily basis that we forget to make space and time for actual human connection. And that's so easy to do now, right? Because we're not even allowed to connect in real life. So it's really important to find how you best effectively communicate and then practice that and be really mindful of that. The other thing I encourage you guys to do is to become the common thread, to bring in a little um, weaving and textile pun into there. Be the actual connector. So if you have always kind of been the attendee, be the host, be the one who hosts a virtual event, an auction, or a giveaway. Start the project that you've always wanted to see or the resource that you've always felt that you needed. Be the person that actually takes that leap, because right now, especially with everything being virtual and being online, it's really not like you don't need a big organization or you don't need a company behind you to create this type of content. You just need to be passionate about what you're doing. And if you are effectively communicating with those that you want to reach, that audience will come to you naturally. So if you would really love to host a virtual event, reach out to all the people you admire, pitch your event to them, and then put it together. And you have the tools to do that right now because everyone has gotten used to being online. I mean, even what we're doing right now through Zoom. So the best way to reach a new audience during this time is to actually be the common thread yourself. And then lastly, I would say use social media wisely. So really think about like the content that you enjoy seeing the most. Put together simple templates or guidelines for yourself to achieve a similar outcome, and then commit to those modes of either sharing or engaging on social media. I think that social media is a blessing and a curse for a lot of small businesses and people. And I think that you really have to be mindful of the way you're using it, but it is truly like the best way to connect with people right now. And the a lot of businesses and a lot of creatives are realizing this though. So the content is everywhere. It's a bit overwhelming. So I would say the way to use it wisely is to really think about what you enjoy seeing the most, what you actually want to engage with, not what you think you should be doing. Because I think as you start to formulate, what you like, those kind of parameters over what you enjoy, you'll realize that you also enjoy creating that content, which is equally as important. Otherwise, social media can be a drag. And then one thing, a thing I just wanted to add to that, because I think we've been talking about, how to reach a social network, how to reach new people, maybe, and how to effectively communicate. And I just want to encourage people to not necessarily try to connect via social media, in the sense that I think that social media is a really beautiful thing to share, and it is a beautiful thing that you can connect via, but like, it's become, at least I've experienced this with my small business, like since the pandemic has hit, that everyone is on social so much that I get, a lot of direct messages a day on social, and I get a lot of questions and a lot of content coming at me through social. And it's kind of like broken down this boundary of professionalism, where I feel like some people have just completely flown through. Like, if you wouldn't type this in an email to someone, like, you should not be DMing it. And so that is kind of my cautionary tale, I would just say to everyone, in terms of like using social media wisely. Like, don't DM someone you want to collaborate with. Don't direct message them. Don't be casual. Like, send them a thoughtful email. And don't get trapped into this idea that just because we're all on social media right now, that is an acceptable way to communicate. Like, get creative with your approach and really think about a thoughtful way to reach out to those people. Um, some people are okay with direct messaging. So I know that's like shouldn't be a rule across the board, but I think most businesses and brands and creatives, that they really appreciate like a thoughtful message, and that can still be sent through direct message, but it often feels too direct, which is why it's called direct message. And then lastly, I'm just going to touch upon how to find purpose in creating during a moment of immense stress and social upheaval, right? Because I don't know about any of you, but when the pandemic first hit, I just immediately felt like, what is the point of, like, this is um, a huge social moment for all of us, that we are all, dealing with this very serious virus, and people are dying. And like, what am I doing? I have a yarn business, like, what is the purpose of what I'm doing? How can I still create and find joy in what I'm doing right now? And so, what I really stopped to think about is like remembering that there is value in giving and seeking joy, even in moments of immense stress and social upheaval. So, with Weaver House, the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden, I started shipping out almost like 3 times the amount of orders that I had been a month prior. And I realized that people needed a creative outlet. Like, they needed to weave, they needed to make fiber art, they needed a moment, a break from all the stress and everything that was going on. And I was able to provide that service. So even though initially I'd felt like, what is the point of yarn right now? I realized that I was actually helping my customers and my students stay sane during this time. And I was able to, find value in giving people that joy. And I was also able to receive joy knowing that I was helping people to stay inspired during this moment. And the other kind of like tag along to that is to avoid a scarcity mindset. and really truly practice gratitude. I mean, gratitude is another buzzword that we hear everywhere, but actually taking, moments in your day to really be, appreciate what you do have, not what you do not have, or what you are able to accomplish, not what you cannot accomplish. Um, and to really like accept the small wins, to really like celebrate them and understand that that is how you can find joy right now, and to kind of, again, like how I'd said before, let go of the big picture in the sense that there has to be this big plan right now. Like right now we can just find gratitude and what we're doing right now in a daily practice. And that goes along with also like practicing empathy, because I feel like that's something that we've all, like, especially professionally, at least I felt this shift where we are all professionally having a lot more empathy for each other, which I think is a really beautiful thing that should be happening all the time. But just understanding that everyone is going through a lot right now, and normally is going through a lot, and having a lot more grace towards each other during, this moment. And then lastly, like viewing this as a path to resilience. So, like, truly during this time, like, we're only getting stronger and building a better future. Like, the pandemic has opened our eyes to issues and social discourse that we may have been asleep to before. And this time has really allowed us to like sit with those issues and face the realities of our modern world. Especially right now, we're seeing people awakening to, our country's racism and becoming passionate about social justice, basic human rights, climate change as there's fires in the West. These are all problems that we are seeing more clearly now, and maybe for some of us, like the first time ever. And people are becoming invested in creating a better future, not only for themselves, but for those around them. And I think that it takes moments of great despair, or it takes moments where everyone really has to like reassess their lives in order for like true resilience and change. Like we're building not only resilience, but we're furthering change and we're growing together. And I think that is a really wonderful silver lining to what is happening. We're allowing ourselves the time and the space to really focus on those issues that matter. So there's another way that we are creating purpose, or we can find purpose during this moment of immense stress. So I will just wrap up in the next 5 minutes. I just wanted to kind of touch upon what I've actually been doing with Weaver House to creatively pivot, and then I'll take some questions. So again, this is our yarn shop, and something that I mentioned is that like during the pandemic, all of our yarn orders have almost tripled, and I think it's because people are trying to stay creative during this time and are either also like discovering weaving for the first time, so they're like learning to weave because now they're at home and they want an outlet. And so what I've really like leaned into that as a small business, I've let go of teaching for the moment. I'm not recording online classes, I'm not putting on out online content, and that's just a decision I made for myself. And instead, I've really dived into providing this yarn service for people and growing the yarn shop. And so I've been adding new fibers to the yarn shop. I've also been adding new products, seeing what people are interested in, the other crafts that they're making. So I've added, more dyes, and I've added threads and sewing supplies. And then the other thing that I've done, because I am unable to teach in person and the education component of Weaver House has kind of paused for the moment, is I started to release early in the pandemic, I started to release digital PDFs for download. So my students and my customers could actually, download a project and accomplish a project that I had designed. And it was a way to continue to teach people. And again, talking about like setting small weekly goals, like this, weaving a piece and creating a weaving pattern and putting together the PDF is something that I can do realistically like in a week. Whereas thinking about recording curriculum for a floor loom weaving class is just like such a huge, huge goal and a big project and kind of overwhelming to think about. So instead, I really like focused on what can I accomplish now, excuse me, to really help keep my students engaged and give them new content. And then the other thing that has really begun to develop kind of for a little while now, but has really become a focus during the pandemic is the revival of the weaving periodical Warp and Weft. So Warp and Weft was originally published by Robin and Russ Hand Weavers, which was a weaving shop. It was published from the 50s through the 80s by them, and it was I think it was bi-weekly periodical that came out, that each periodical had like a physical weave structure woven sample in it, and was like a tiny little like project gift to all of Russ Groff's, that was the founder of Robin and Russ Handweaver, all of his students. And so I have connected actually with Russ's one of his closest friends, who he left all of the copyright to, and also left all of the originals to. And her and I have begun working together to create a revival called Warp and Weft magazine. So these are covers of some of the back issues. And as that's a lot of content, and getting a weaving magazine going is a lot of work. So in the meantime, what I've been doing is I have been conducting artist interviews. I call them field notes. And essentially I send weavers, and I just started doing actually mills and manufacturers as well. I send them 10 questions, and then they answer the questions and get back to me with images of their work and studio practice. And like, this is artist and weaver Susie Taylor. And so it's like they're a little bit of their back info, and then they answer these 10 questions, and then I show images of their woven work as well. And I published this on Field Notes, which is a blog on the Warp and Weft magazine website. And it's been a really phenomenal way for the community to not only learn about different weavers and artists, but to stay connected and to share new information. And again, like I'm talking about these small goals, like it's a very small way to share this information while we're also preparing the magazine and working on the first issue of the magazine and getting that up and running. So that has been another project that I've really been focusing during this pandemic, and another way to create an educational resource for people when I'm unable to actually like teach in person. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening and following along. I just put on here contact info, our website, our email address, and our Instagram, and then the same for my personal work, rachelsnack.com, and my Instagram. And I'd love to have you guys follow along, sign up for our mailing list, take a look at our online shop, and send me an email if you have any questions about anything. But it was really great talking to you guys.
Rachel, thank you. That was fantastic. We do have a handful of questions for you.
Okay.
So the first one is, do you have any advice for students about how to set boundaries? Students can't always say no. What are some tips about time management and boundary setting that can be applied to help students have some time to experience the joy of being disconnected for a bit while still meeting deadlines?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, to be honest, that is something that I was not great at doing when I was a student, setting boundaries for myself. And I think that's something you learn the older you get, and you prioritize. I was the person that was always in the studio till 1 a.m. trying to get my stuff done. But I found that I think when you I think as a student, you're expected to do a lot aside from your schoolwork. And if you're working another job and something like that, obviously that's something you can't help. But I think like setting expectations for yourself that you also have to have like this, you know, well, before the pandemic, but this like vivid social life. And you also like have to be involved in clubs and extracurricular activities and all this other stuff that is just kind of like an unrealistic expectation of being a student. I think if you like strip away all of that and you just focus on your coursework and you say like, I'm going to prioritize my own mental health And also what I need, if that's, taking a bath once a week, I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to set this X amount of hours to get my coursework done. And I think if you find that you genuinely set those boundaries for yourself, you'll feel less overwhelmed and you'll stop putting pressure on yourself to also like accomplish more than you maybe need to accomplish. Cause that was always me as a student. I was like, okay, you would require 8 samples and I would make 25. And it's like, no one required that. I was just putting these extra expectations on me. So actually like feeling like you are giving enough and you are doing enough and shifting that mindset, I think is important.
Great points. What collaborations have you found most rewarding during this COVID-19 pivot?
Oh, so I've actually been taking a lot more weaving work for private collectors, for people who are just looking for a woven piece in their homes. And those projects are a lot of work because you're working one-on-one with normally someone who has not purchased a textile or either a piece of art like that before. So it's a lot of slow processes to get the work complete. Whereas like when I have clients that I work for, we've worked together 10 times. So the process is streamlined and it's really easy to accomplish. So I think I've slowed down and allowed myself to take on those more like one-on-one projects, and I'm creating like really meaningful textiles for people to have in their homes, which is really fun to do.
Well, that leads very directly into the next question, which is
Okay.
how do people or companies typically approach you for commissions, and what are those conversations like?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, so that's a very complex question. I'll try not to ramble too much. Mainly, I do get contacted a lot from companies, either email or Instagram. I'll have a lot of companies find me through social media. So, social media is an excellent tool for that. And then, normally, depending on what the project is, I at this point have um, portfolio PDFs essentially. So, if someone's reaching out, for me to design a textile to be remanufactured, or if they're reaching out to have like a one of a kind art commission, like I have different PDFs that explain all the pricing structure, the timeline, like everything at this point, so that I'm not like re-explaining that over and over again. And then so I can just email them that information and say, this is everything you need to know in the packet. Let me know what your questions are, and then let's schedule a phone call so that I'm not like re-explaining all of that. And then that like really helps set expectations too of like what I'm actually going to be making. And then I think this is a I don't know if this is part of the question, but word of advice I always give to people is like um, companies who are working with you for the first time, you really need to like set expectations of what your time commitment is and then what you're actually producing for them. Because often, like if they've never worked with a textile designer before, and maybe you've also never worked with a company like that before, there can be big expectations that then you're spending way more time than what you're getting compensated fulfilling. So like having very clear expectations of like what they're actually going to receive, and then also saying like, I am going to do this amount of work for this price, and if it goes beyond that, this is the additional price. And then because then they're also going to work hard to stay streamlined in what they're actually, paying you for, because they don't want to go beyond that normally. So then they won't waste your time in a sense. Like it kind of helps everyone to have those expectations set in place.
Great. How did you know it was time to start Weaver House?
Oh, um, I don't know. I think so before starting Weaver House, I was the creative director of Harrisville Designs, which is a yarn and knitting company, and they also have a weaving component in New Hampshire. And I think I was feeling I have always been a very stubbornly creative person. Like I want to do things the way that I want to do them. And I think I was just realizing that any corporate setting, like not specific to them, even just like literally any other company, I was always going to be working under someone else's creative vision, even as the creative director. And so I think it was just important for me to recognize that I really wanted to pave my own path and be able to, emulate my own vision. And I just kind of took a leap of faith that at that point I had grown a social network that was like very supportive and encouraging. And I just decided to try it. Yeah.
Thank you. We're going to take one more question, and I apologize to our guests that we're not getting to everybody's questions today, but I do want to put out just a little plug. Please check out Rachel. Check out her store, her shop. It's a wonderful. She has a wonderful social media presence,
Oh,
and
thank you.
the links are in the chat. So one more question for you, Rachel. Do you have
Okay.
any thoughts on how, for someone who is teaching themselves weaving, to find some
Mhm.
structure or process in developing their work without having the imposed structure of a course? There is so much choice
Mm.
in direction that one can go.
That's a great question. I think that comes down to what you become most excited about, right? So like I think like looking at tons of books and looking at weavers that came before you, like looking at fine artists and really figuring out like what out of what you're seeing, like what techniques really excite you, and then focusing on maybe learning those techniques instead of feeling like you have to learn a little bit of everything. Because like eventually as you start weaving more and more, like you will learn a little bit of everything, but really thinking like, I really love painted warps, I love e-cut, that's what I want to focus on, not worrying about structure maybe, and structure variations maybe will come later, or really focusing on one structure. And then everything else will kind of fall into place. I feel like the more that you're studying and you're trialing things, but instead of trying to learn everything at once, like really just decide what you like, what really gets your heart going, and then focus on that.
Thank you. Rachel, thank you
Yeah.
so much. That was a brilliant presentation.
Thank
Um,
you.
and again, when things open back up, visit
I
Rachel
know.
in the Bach building. Her shop is fantastic. So,
Thanks so much for having me.
all right.
Take
Thank you
care.
so much and stay safe. Bye.
Bye.